give me a question, and I need to answer. Yeah, I'm kind of like that. That's nice meeting you both.
My pleasure.
It's my Tiana phone. It's my bat bell.
Full moon talk and then what?
Right, she needs the heart.
So I'm serving you guys the best tea that I have. I'm a monkey. It's monkey moon. We got golden berries, pears. What a party. The tea I'm serving is called Panchen Lama, the premier tea of Master Wang. From 1980.
Oh, it's a good year.
It's the same age as me. And you too.
Yeah,
80 babies. That makes sense.
And Elizabeth.
What?
I'm gonna make sense.
Oh my God. Okay. So it's customary to smell the tea first, make sure I'm not serving you urine, because both are warm.
I would worry about this.
Yes, some crazy kidney tea, right?
Yeah.
How's my microphone? Is that picking up a little Seanan chuckle? Those little cute ad libs? What a slow start to this video. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is our second full moon talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first one went pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New angle, new friends, bigger table. Yellow.
Okay. So hello, welcome. I think that something about me, right? So I think when you ask me about like notes and taking notes, I'm a premier note taker, fairly academic in training, mixed with being a Gongfu ren, you know. So I've studied Gongfu most of my life in one form or another, starting with Korean kicking style, and then training in China and Sichuan Bana, and then here in the States, studying under our mutual friend Matt Lucas in the Persian system, also Liberty Yoga, Qigong, things like that. At some point in time, it all starts to blend together, right?
Sichuan Bana. That's where this tea's from.
Yeah. Yunnan, oh man, such a great area. And then I came under tutelage of Ming by the circumstance of my own fate. 2011. And then despite his passing in 2015, in practicing, you know, what he left behind ever since. I will admit, what's interesting to me about studying this material, don't worry, this will get interesting eventually, is that there is a little bit of way that we need to shift, or at least become aware of our own prejudice, you know, when it comes to worldview. And the modern worldview, and something that Ming emphasized over and over again, is you know, trying to study any of the Asian world, you know, wisdom traditions does require an investigation of what we think we are and what we think the world is. To which I'd say, this system that we're discussing, the idea of like a monkey moon, and all these things are not necessarily just like astrology, but a sequence of time. And within that, there's basically based in a syncretic tradition of the interlay between Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, which there is a really strong syncretic tradition, how they all overlap and work together. So the worldview of what it means to be a human being in this astrological system is not just like, okay, you're a monkey, that's your person, you know, like it's a little bit more nuanced than that, right? Because you actually have a whole host of things that help sort of congeal and define what it means for you to be a person. And even just the idea of personhood itself is something that's a little bit, from other sort of worldviews, something that's a little bit dubious.
Dubious in prison.
Right. This goes into the question that was asked by Sarah last moon. She asked me this question as we were talking about this being a system that way of looking at the world and way of looking at ourselves in the world as human beings, that in which the self is non-abiding. This notion of a non-abiding self. Now, I'm a lay person, right? I'm not ordained in any particular like tradition, system, like Taoism or Buddhism. But the worldview is like deeply entrenched into the astrological system that Ming left behind. It's all part of the systems that and the teachings that he was offering during that time, anywhere from Taoism to Buddhism, and how it relates to the sequence of time in Chinese culture. Because in Chinese culture is basically where all these things come together. You can't say that about too many other places in the world. Like there is a vibrant syncretic tradition that is left behind, is deeply embedded in Chinese culture, that discusses these topics actively within cultural artifacts like being a monkey or the sequence of time itself and what it means to be a human being. So her question was, can you talk more about this idea of like, how can the self be non-abiding?
Yeah.
And what does that actually say about, say, the influences of the ancestors, if they're not abiding?
Can you start with talking a little bit more, or at least like operationally defining abiding? Because I want to make sure that I'm understanding fully how you're using this term.
And it will come. Yeah. Exactly. So abiding meaning constant, yeah. So like enduring,
Okay.
like the notion in respect directly answering Sarah's question is to say that even from a Taoist perspective, everything that we experience is both compound and processional, meaning that you could look at it atomistically or elementally. Everything's made of the elements.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, there's nothing else. There's not these elements make this person and that the person abides. There's only the elemental exchange. So even in Buddhist thought, in a nutshell, when you're looking at the Four Noble Truths about, everything being deeply transitory, including your experience, right? So everything that you may enjoy is basically about to turn the other direction. It's about to become ugly, even though it's super great right now. But also at the same time, everything that's bad is about to turn good. So this notion of continuous change and the transitoriness of life applies to the perceiver as well as to what's perceived.
Okay.
There's a reason why. That's the reason why the difference between, say, Buddhist and Hindu Tantra is that Buddhist Tantra is like, there is no self underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hindus are like, wait. We like that part. And so when I cultivate that. So the Buddhist Tantric worldview is, the Buddhist worldview is that there is no abiding self, because what you actually have are what's called the aggregates. Five senses, thoughts, and feelings.
Yeah.
These aggregates collect, continue. They form bunches, and these bunches feel like a sense of continuous self. But if you're not being in contemplation on your experience, these things just naturally continue. Maybe even develop a momentum, very long momentum of centuries of being, from Wisconsin, right? I'm from Wisconsin, right? So this is an ancestral pattern that begins to develop, passed on generation to generation, becomes something that feels very, very real. In fact, not to say that anything's more true than the other. This is where the Confucianism comes in. You should honor that. You shouldn't just, that'd be very rude to say your ancestors are vacuous. There is no there. It's actually, from the Confucian standpoint, we don't do that because we're human beings and we're all playing along. When I say, great tea, you say, thank you, and you think you know what I mean, right? Like, we agree, because it's part of being a human being is to kind of follow these places of custom, which is the reason why Confucianism plays such an emphasis on custom and tradition and momentum, because, if we don't, the whole thing could fall apart. And if you're a monk living in the hill or a nun, living in the hills, you want it to fall apart. Because at the root underneath that is the experience of mind, or from a Taoist perspective, nature, or this, approaching this notion of enlightenment. None of the wisdom traditions themselves are revelatory, they're contemplative.
Yeah.
It means we're not like trying to get the sermon from the mount, bring it down to save people's lives. You're just working with your own experience. That's really all there is to it. So this is more or less the answer to the question that Sarah is providing. Because if, to quote Ming here, the only authentic observance of a phenomenon is ongoing. We're not looking to make a conclusion. We're staying with it. We're just staying with it. So when we say something is not abiding, it means we're committed to, yeah, well, it looks that way now.
You can't tell unless you continue.
I'm just saying, let's keep it going. Yeah, let's not, I can sit here, that's fine. But eventually someone else will sit here, and we don't have to get rigid about it. We can actually just be polite, because in reality, nobody knows. Yeah, and that declaring that I know and you don't, or declaring that I know means that I have to say you don't. And if we say, oh, it's both and, eventually that's going to break down somewhere along the line. So why not neither? And just be polite, right? And keep the ball rolling. So how the hell does this relate to Monkey Moon?
Did it just really?
I swear this wasn't intended to be a tangent. But monkeys, can be tangent.
I see what you did.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this stuff because I spend so much time with it. I write on these things daily as a astrological offering, and trying to coalesce an understanding of what it means for a particular moon. I think what's interesting for me is that approaching the Earth Monkey Moon, right, which is the moon that we're in, is natively a metal element. We're in, it's an Earth Monkey Moon and a Water Tiger year. Right? So those are the dynamics. We're about halfway through. And Monkey Moon is always the first moon of autumn. And some of the chi nodes and other indicators didn't quite catch up till autumn, just recently. As a matter of fact, the weekend that we just went through was actually fairly dramatic sort of squeezing, out excess so that we are actually more fully prepared to embrace a more stripped down model of behavior. Typically speaking, just procedurally, recommendation like practical recommendations of autumn are to scale back, to cut down obligations, to pace ourselves, to consider the notion of harvest. And you can't really devise a sense of value over the work we've done unless you actually slow down and assess and start making discernments between, what we were talking about last moon was like, how do we conclude? Like, how do we bring things to conclusion? Do we ever bring things to conclusion? Like, part of what we're working with in the culture that we're in is that we're in this place of, pedal to the metal constantly. And that if we're doing 9 times more than we need to, scaling back to 3 times more than we need to, is seen as like, relaxing. So we're up against that, practically speaking. But that's just how things are. The sequence of time is always manifesting in the culture that it's in. It's not something that's like an ideal state that the current place we're in needs to conform to. Everybody's, pacing themselves and cutting back obligations is different. And culturally derived, and also cultures within the cultures and individually. So it can get a little bit complex. Navigating that complexity is why we call it monkey moon. Because the monkey is more or less, as a chi character, not taking anything for granted. And sort of testing the boundaries and limits of everything that seems to have a boundary and a limit, right? And offering up, in a kind of potentially contrarian sort of way, how, showing how a current assessment of any particular situation is somehow flawed, in maybe a nice way, and maybe also in a mischievous way. So they're sort of playing with the construction of organization that is sort of prevalent coming out of summer, right? When we're at such great heights, we're starting to kind of decline. We have to start making decisions on the fly. And that's more or less what a monkey moon is like. So the image, and I swear I was aiming to make this succinct so that everybody could understand it, but I have a tendency, my language tends to kind of take off on me. The succinct image that I wanted to bring forward is thinking about being at the beach. So everybody's at the beach. And everybody's doing different things with the sand. Some people not doing anything, just like relaxing. Other people are making whole structures, buildings, and all these different roads. Like they're creating, this vast array of imaginary resources, and the tide is coming. This is the idea: is that we're in. I mean, this is generally an applicable, I think, metaphor generally, but particularly in a water tiger moon, we're basically looking at ways in which how the terrain starts to shift or how the tide starts to come in necessitates great imagination, and working with conditions as we have them, and finding solutions to problems as things start to fall apart. as sandcastles come down. Like, how do you maintain them? Do you wipe the whole slate clean? Like, there's different ways of coping with that, depending on your level of investment. And if you think that if you're in the middle of Iowa, you imagine yourself not at the beach, you're surrounded by water. That's the idea. Like in a water tiger year, this notion of, well, let's just say, been a lot of changes. Water tiger year I assessed as like great potential for reinvention through loss. And water tiger may be saving the best for last. So if it felt like tumultuous kind of at the beginning, yeah. But still, there's more. It's not one wave with a water tiger year, it's multiple. So Earth, monkey, moon could be the opportunity to have controlled descent. All right. So I know how to manage this condition. I, set myself up such that necessity is the mother of invention. I know how to create conditions in which these opportunities are able to be, continue. And I can sort of avoid it, controlled descent. I don't have to be too painful. Or I could have my sandcastle washed away. Whether you see that as things as the same, or whether you see those things as an opportunity, moments of distress that turn into liberation, or just stay distress. It's gonna kind of depend on the person. But that's more or less the dynamics that we're looking at when it comes to a monkey moon. And this particular monkey moon, Earth monkey moon, in a water tiger year. That's the best metaphor I got. Is this kind of playful image of the beach where there's lots of different things that are happening and a lot of potential for good management, good resource management. But there's also equally great potential for people losing their mind and being like overly stressed out because they're invested in something. Their imagination is invested in something like they can't sustain. But what is delusion? If you take morality out of it, what is delusion? If you're not condemning them, it's creativity. It's incredibly creative, to be in a place of delusion. Like we do it from a Buddhist perspective, we do it continuously. And for the most part, that's all we're doing until we recognize our delusion. And we're able to frame it in a kind of context. So the monkey moon, or the monkey chi, represents this place of imagination. And our imagination may have very long precedent, strong ancestral precedents even, about who you think you are. And where does that come from? Like, right, who knows? So this place of imagination, and that, whether, if you're able to organize your imagination, yeah, right. Most people, you're like, sure.
Seems
Yeah.
contrary.
Maybe. Maybe if you think of imagination as like an open-ended platform, right? No limit, I could just do whatever I want, sort of thing. Yeah. Or if you think of imagination as you do, if you're in a car, you imagine that car to still be there right now. That's also an act of imagination.
More organized than that.
Right. So if we're only looking at imagination as like fancy or like or fantasy, if we equate imagination with fantasy, I think the lesson is we're missing out on a lot of what imagination is actually doing. Because as it turns out, imagination is a huge part of our experience in terms of, you take for granted your name actually refers to anything. Man, we do it, we do it. Or that those are my clothes, like just going back to the 5 aggregates, senses, thoughts, and feelings coalesce into what? The creation of a self, like a creation of a personhood. Somebody gave me a name a long time ago. I continue to hear it. I go along with it. I say yes. Like I'm participating in a kind of fluidity, but it's a deep act of imagination. Like it has no reality outside of us agreeing to it. Yeah. So if we're thinking of imagination on that level, then there's a great deal, many things that we agree to all the time and that we participate with. I think the idea is any number of those things could be swept away. If we're looking at things in terms of you know, are the conditions of a water tiger year, maybe none of those things. Maybe we organize our imagination safer, you know, so there's no real threat. The sort of Confucian idea is like, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's scale back and actually make arrangements between ourselves in which we can, you know, guarantee some level of reliability. This is kind of an esoteric conversation, but given, you know, what's available in this particular year and the challenges of this year, how much out there is causing us stress just by the imperative and the insistence on whatever it's saying being important, like it's screaming at you like constantly. I think this is a good opportunity to recognize, like, why does that stress me out? Like whatever I'm hearing from the outside world, and so-called outside world, what is it that I'm resonating with? Why is it creating a, you know, a level of stress in me? Because, you know, autumn is the beginning of the end, and it is the opportunity that we have to set things in order. So practically speaking, you know, it's time to kind of get things in order. So sift through the things that we are invested in and really ask ourselves, why are we invested in those things? Like, where's the hook in me that creates the karma for this to exist? Right. There I am in this place. And, you know, begin the edit. That would be that would be the encouragement, is to begin the edit politely, no suppression, just sort of slowly stepping back. It's kind of like you know, leaving the party. And like around 11, you just kind of stand by the door, you know, and not telegraphing your move, but you're just sort of you're abiding, and like, oh, I'm not going to be out by the pool right now. I'm going to be kind of close to the door. So when I see my moment, I know when to go. You know, similar, you know, kinds of things in terms of scaling back our investments on things or wrapping it up. We don't really do that, bring things to conclusion. We just sort of keep carrying it through all year long. But a seasonal way of life is to sort of encourage that sort of behavior. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I've definitely gone in it. This is, you know, welcome to my world, everyone. These sort of esoteric places that exist.
The thought of imagination being much broader than how you talked about getting my cars to across the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
It made me think of the S word, that special swastika hat that's in the box. Is the cat.
Oh, Schrödinger. Yeah. I often describe the chi of monkey with my clients as the uncertainty principle, like Gödel. Gödel had, he's a mathematician. Yeah, so I went to Cal and studied philosophy, so I can talk about this. That he basically, everybody was big on theorems and trying to create a system, an axiom of mathematics, so that we could show that mathematics exists outside of our own use of it, that it is the language of the universe. That was always the goal. They always failed. And Gödel was one of the reasons why he failed, because he basically showed how you could write down all the axioms and create every system, but you can always come up with an axiom that would stand outside the system. So, so his application of this theory to mathematics then became something much broader, called the uncertainty principle. Is it no matter what system that you create for describing any situation, you can always create something out that stands outside the description.
Mhm.
Seems kind of obvious to most people. But for mathematicians, very fixated on the idea that everything can be organized, a set of axioms. This was very disconcerting. But that's very similar to monkey. Monkey looks upon systems of thought or ways of organizing ourselves that seem very, and they want to just poke at, be like, well, what about?
Mhm.
And I think about, that sounds nice, but these people, they didn't get the ticket, and they're more interested in what stands outside the rule, or ways of showing, rule might be nice, but it misses all of this, right? And it's this way of like actually illustrating that nothing good lasts forever. High plateau of yang qi lasts through, horse moon and the goat moon. We make a lot, so I describe what comes after that as kind of like a mild addiction. We get very used to the sun being out, like, oh, all this energy, keep going, 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 going. I can fit more things in my schedule. Like you're buzzing. And monkey moon is kind of like that time where you're like, okay, I can keep, can I wait till next Tuesday? And that you're doing what you can to like keep it juggling, so I can keep the momentum going. But there's also a hard reality that starts creeping into that scenario. And that hard reality will be even more apparent next moon. So now is the time where, like, instead of continuing to, juggle all these things, the encouragement, is the reason why I went so esoteric, is to really engage with what we're sustaining in our imagination. Who am I here? Like, why do I keep this going? And does it have precedent? Is it just me? Or am I in the slipstream of something bigger? Like, that would be the Confucian encouragement, would be like, be continuous. If that's something you've been doing, for years and years, continue.
And that's coming through.
Right.
That's the guru, one who's consistent.
Right. Exactly. And also reminding you, the guru, of your consistency, not at a moral imperative, but just like that your consistency is natural and always present. Doesn't require any coaxing. It's sort of like the self-evident way. Things just move forward. So this is also a time of synchronicities, right? But this is also hungry ghost moon.
Mhm.
So this is an important point. Took me a long time to get to.
We'll time mark these things in the recordings.
So hungry ghost moon is to say that in this place of mild addiction, yeah, you've got company. Where you're like kind of like a little bit agitated, and like there's you've got ancestors that felt that way too, and they're kind of collected in that space, and they're with you in that way. So some of the Ulambana tradition is to say, and there's another word I can't remember right now in the Chinese, is to say for a couple weeks out of this moon, the gates of hell open.
Mhm.
And all those ancestors that are in jail, they get parole. And they're coming out going, hey, that place is really terrible. Can you help me? I need bail money. So I cannot be this way. And so it's an opportunity. There is ritual, burning hell money, things of that nature. But for people like us, not really versed in those sorts of rituals, right? And the meaning of those rituals. What I say is actually your impeccable conduct is really what matters. So good question. What's that? What does it mean to be impeccable? Because it's not moral either. Impeccability is a discipline. Impeccability is a kind of discipline in which you do manage your imagination. You do sort of steer it, because imagination hijacked by fantasy takes off, and it takes you out of your actual situation to some other place. Right? And so impeccability would be to bring it back. How can imagination be useful to my actual situation right here, right now? Looking at the conditions that I face in a very realistic way. No, maybe if, like, how can I make these 4 things do what I want them to? Or, how do I manage this situation in a realistic, pragmatic kind of way? It does take, it takes a lot of imagination to do that, and to not go someplace else where, you want, oh, if maybe then this other person, and if they had shown up, then it would have been so much better, right? We do that very easily. And there's a whole host of, ancestors that felt the same way and died feeling that way. And our impeccable conduct helps them, not just us. So that's my kind of, shortcut. Like, instead of necessarily going to find all the hell money and going to a graveyard, bowing and all that stuff, because we don't have a precedent for that. So it's a little bit like, wearing shoes, a certain pair of shoes only once a year. It doesn't have a lot of power to do that unless you have some relationship to the view and that spawns that tradition, right? And you actually have some relationship in that way. So, I agree, and I'm working with Ming here, we have to work with what we have, right? And the kinds of ancestors we come from. So I think, just saying, be real with ourselves, be honest with ourselves. What do we got? All right, I don't really have a whole lot, okay. Because it doesn't really matter how much you have. It's really about just how you treat it, how you hold it. And we have a problem in this country, because we have a tendency of imagining unlimited resources, and it's created a problem for us. So I feel like this particular moon it brings that up in a very strong way. I think for most people, feel, we get a little short of breath because we know, it's twilight and I can't see as well. And so what am I going to do about, right? And the first thing you got to do is be real. Hungry ghosts just came into the room.
Can I ask a little bit more about kind of tying where we are now to the idea that you opened with around abiding and ancestors, and you were talking about that sense of and from Wisconsin, because that's kind of what the information of the sense is that you have that stretches back. So when you're talking about the hungry ghosts specifically and those ancestors, you're talking about the individual's relationship to the kind of through line of consistency of where a person came from with that sense of ancestry. Because what I'm trying to separate out is when I think about ancestry, it gets real vast really quick. The tree has so many branches, but the through line of my experience is very narrow. So what is what in a conversation when we're talking about gates of hell being open and ancestors are coming up and are looking for assistance, who's showing up potentially?
Yeah, great question. generally speaking, as I've been taught in the tradition, the people that are showing up are not the people that are talked about when it comes to who's in your ancestral line. Most of the reason why you have ghosts is because they're unaddressed. Right? They're not given a chance to be resolved. And so they sort of languish. I consider ghosts like a broken record. They just kind of like can't get out of their story of like, why did that person do that? You know, like, or if I had only, I would have been, they can't like get perspective what their situation actually was. Fixation. We've all been there. That place of fixation, you know, and tension, like this, you know, from the talking about personhood, you know, ever gone through like a certain, ever drive through a certain place of, you know, right, maybe around town. Yeah, it seems like every time I take this corner and go over here, I just get this weird, terrible headache, bad mood. All of a sudden, man, I can't stop thinking terrible, negative thoughts, and then it's gone. Well, what was that? You know, like these sorts of things is to say that it's sort of reinforcing the idea that whatever it is you think of as a self, it's a bit more malleable, because at a very minor level, Chinese tradition would call that possession, even for just like a short period of time, and it may last an afternoon, and there may be a cosmological availability to it given the day, and there could be some feng shui thing in there, an ancestral thing. Cofactors in any given experience are pretty large. This is why most everything could be considered a coincidence. You know, and I often say cause and effect may not really be here, but that doesn't mean that there isn't meaning. To coincidence or to correlation. Correlation may not be causation, but it carries a lot of meaning, right? This is the core of humanity. We're very obsessed with causation. So we're only thinking about like what's, you know, that's why you think of imagination as like we're materialists, so we think of it as like a cognitive process that you could improve if you do certain exercises or if you got the right education and blah, blah, blah. Like actually, you may only be shining a bigger light on the thing we always all do constantly in place of imagination, imagining that you exist. You know, like have some five senses, thoughts, and feelings give you an understanding of my personhood in space. Like it's a very creative thing to do. Just, and that's something that we just, that is language based, you know, has some definite relationship to language and also to heritage. So we have this like continuity of experience that we call like ancestry, but that continuity of experience and even everything in nature is compound processional, even the realm of what's so-called the realm of the ancestors themselves. Not fixed, also compounded processional. Also a place of change, not fixed. You know, this would be like talking, be directing this to Sarah, this idea that your ancestors are somehow fixed. That is also very much imagination. Useful, but like imagine as 100 years from now, that portrait of your ancestors very different. You may be in there, right? You may be one of the offshoots of the tree, not really addressed or talked to very much. You may, you know, how long does it take to die? Bardo systems are timeless. We say 100, 120 years, but in the moment, there is no time. It's just forever. That's the notion of the Bardo. So, in direct answer to the question, how to delineate? It would depend on your ancestral practice, like the engagement, right? Not thinking of imagination is somehow like less than. We have that tendency too. We think imagination is somehow not as valid as. No, this is imaginary. Like the whole thing is imaginary. It's That's the Buddhist understanding. That's even the Taoist, like, it's really just contemplate on that. Not to say like it's therefore worthless. Like, no, it's got great value. But if we're going to assign value and think it's forever, that would just might be a little premature. That's all. So if you have an ancestral practice of some kind, right, some relationship there, in the Confucian understanding is that your beneficent ancestors are always the dominant story, because nothing is sustained by negativity. Everything's sustained by positivity. That no matter how badly our parents treated us, they really did love us, in the way they could. I mean, it's just hardwired to be that way. Contrary to our experience, sometimes we can't find it. That doesn't matter. The nature of the relationship itself is in that core place of respect. That's why the Confucians have, no matter your father's your father, you bow. Your mother's your mother, you bow. Like, even if they were terrible parents, because that's the only way you come here. That's the only way you get to play the game. Is you got to come through that relationship. So the continuation of any ancestral line is always done through positivity. So if you have ancestors on the altar, you want to gravitate to. You're like, oh, my grandmother. I may not have a really good relationship with my parents, but my grandmother. That's where you go. That's all the branches are wide. Go to where you're moved. Would be the answer. Go to where you're called, where you find resonance, because guaranteed nobody here is unique. We're actually a reflection of something that's occurred before. Somewhere, in that stream. So when we have these moments of, some of the more seedy ancestors kind of coming up looking for help, we rest on the notion that our ancestors are standing in help regulate that experience. It's not that all the positive ancestors got pushed out of the way and it's only the people from hell. Like, that's a little hyperbolic, like it just means that it's kind of like Dia de los Muertos, like, but you're giving more emphasis to the people who need help, because you're also dealing with your own insecurities. It's meant to be parallel, like corollary. My own experience of like, I'm feeling agitated and confused. I don't know what to do. Do I have everything? All this kind of levels of uncertainty that is available in the seventh moon is related to the presence of the kind of activated presence of those ancestors. Does that answer or come close to that question?
I'm close to the question.
Yeah.
It's interesting to have ancestors that are the ones that aren't known are the ones that are coming up. And
Makes
so
sense.
it makes sense, but how do you know that's who that is? In the, like that's the,
I don't
or
think
that is the like in the experience of this agitation sense, I suppose that is the opportunity to do the now. Right?
Or just offer. It's not really about identifying anybody. It's just being like, hey, I know you're having a hard time.
Knowing that there is a hard time being had.
Yeah. So we participate and, show our compassion in that way, because I'm having a hard time breathing, like I want to help myself too. I help you.
That's fascinating. I'm not getting it off.
Nope.
It's really easy to think of our ancestors as benevolent, as guidance, as protectors. So you're presenting this idea of the hell realm ancestry. It's like, yeah, keep on, yeah.
Right, right.
And so that's an interesting concept. And what a thought to bring resolve and completion to those spirits. Because healing forward is healing backwards, and healing backwards is healing forwards. So I'm, curious at this notion of ancestor altar now.
Yeah, and there's a time for it, like I was talking about earlier. It's one of the things that was kind of an unanswered question in the material for me, in the material that being left behind, that I've been kind of puzzling on, because everywhere on the internet, they're like, 7th moon is a hungry ghost moon, look out, and like, these are the things that you should do, stay away from bodies of water, and make offerings to your ancestor altar, burn hell money, blah blah blah. Wear bright colors, don't wear dark colors. These are little superstitions, right? What we call superstitions. So having the 2 weeks, but the Ming's notes are in the first week of the 8th moon, or the first day of the 8th moon, is when you make all those offerings. But that's, it's slightly different than some of the other information that's out there. So, but it's a 2-week period. So that's why I was like, okay, this weekend, full moon weekend, is when it would start, and it would actually end at the new moon. So during that time, in that 2-week period of stretch, there are favorable days to do ritual.
So this is the special weekend.
This would be a good weekend, particularly Saturday, Friday or Saturday. Sunday, if you're a skilled ritual practitioner, you can make offerings. But yeah, it could be tricky. Not to freak anybody out, but like,
it's like the smoke goes down or something, and your brother kills you.
Well, you want to be very intentional about what you're addressing, like in making offerings. You want to be, don't go off on a tangent, right? Don't let your imagination wander, right? You want to be clear and simple in that way. Maybe things that are fragrant, because it's an Earth Pig Day. So like flowers and things that that move you emotionally, I think would be helpful. If you're on, very strong sense, could work. But it also depends on your relationship to tobacco. If it's tricky, then you might be fostering that kind of like, I smell, like that kind of like, oh, I love tobacco, and furthering a kind of entanglement. But here, like, we might be overthinking it, like divination, it should just be, you should pay attention to what moves you. Because I can't emphasize that enough. That's really where the juice is. It's not in like whatever conceptual nonsense is coming out of my mouth. Like it's actually in paying attention to your own experience. This is the reason why it's a contemplative tradition and not a revelatory one. And I think this is why the Chinese traditions still carry so much weight, is because they're only ever centered around your own experience, and not the words of a prophet, and not even the words of a teacher. It has to be like something that you actually practice, something you actually do in your own life. Because the guarantee is this: everyone's practicing something. That you can't not practice something. And so coming into awareness about what it is you're practicing in life is very much, it's an important thing if you consider that, the message of autumn is, here it comes. And that's the message of life. It's like, okay. Any day now, like it could be, it's just an awareness of that is much more likely. So what are you practicing? would be the question. And that goes into, to me, that ties into, there's an imagination in that, that has to do with what you think you are. And it turns out that's a big part of what being a human being is doing that. Yeah, that's Golden berries anyway.
Starting power. Have it all be imagined.
I mean, I think that earth monkeys are a little flat-footed. They're not as diverse as metal monkeys. Yeah, they're not as like metal monkeys are a bit more adept to the foolishness. Whereas earth monkeys, they can be like kind of caught a little bit more flat-footed. And I think that might be relevant, to, even though the elemental configuration in relationship to a water tiger is favorable, earth controlling water, like serving as a cup containment. Yeah. I think that it's very likely, because earth monkey could be a little flat-footed, not so quick on their feet, that, you spill. And then, I really built this castle and I'm really wanted it to stay here. I thought it was gonna, it was high up on the hill. The tide's way down there. How did it get up here? And you lose it. So what then? I think that's why I use the analogy of everybody at the beach.
The way I first received that too is everybody's at the beach making castles, playing with resources.
Yeah.
And our natural resources. Hey, we're at the hour.
Uh-huh.
How about we open it for questions?
Yeah, I'm definitely open.
So people on the Zooms, we're losing folks. A couple people logged out, that's fine. If you're there and you have a question for Shannon, or me, or Naoko, Tiana, or Rob.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, was there any thoughts or follow-up on answer to that, or any other questions?
We've gone far enough away from the question that my attention has gone more to the last things that were said than the question at this point. To bring it back to you, not at this time.
Yeah.
These are the parts that we're going to edit.
Yeah,
Little-
the unbearable silence.
Oh, why so unbearable?
Yeah, I like that we're going to get Yeah, sometimes it's funny when you get into a conversation and the editor that you can see the face now. One idea.
Yeah.
And you don't know how much sweat you're shot.
Yeah, I mean, I go on what you said about like empowerment. It's tremendously empowering. I think there's a lot of potential for empowerment, like just the idea of necessity being the mother of invention, like coming up with like real, tangible sorts of, hey, we don't have this anymore, so let's do this, like make 4 or 5 different things, maybe even create something, this moon and next moon that can be very long lasting, that can be very enduring even, maybe even carrying us into next year. I think that
You're talking about like something that is created in the moment when the tide is coming is already being created to endure tide. And so in that way it can endure through the timeline.
yeah, I mean, we get feedback, right? And this is an excellent moon for feedback, to like getting feedback on our experience and coming up with creative solutions for what we encounter. Given that like the role of summer was growth and acquisition. And like it's I think sometimes it's hard to understand how far we've come. Like we've all been tremendously busy, like doing lots of things and like growing, expanding, and so pulling back from that, then there's an editing process and an assessment about like what this means to us. What are we looking for here? What do we want to do with that? How do we want to carry it forward? Do we want to distribute it, like give it to other people? Like there's some ways in which this moon continues some of the aspects of last moon, which is distribution, right? Sharing, but it's much more localized in that way. It's much more kind of tribal rather than general.
So monkey offers instead of
Maybe steals 3 peaches and then hands 2, cuts the other one in half. And like, what's the, stealing from who? Who owns the tree? No one owns the tree, right? It's imaginary. This idea, stealing implies a whole structure of existence that actually maybe not really relevant anymore, right? So that reimagining out of necessity, what our resources are, who we are to them, and who we are to each other, it can be really powerful, particularly this year in a time in which everything seems to be circling the drain with the water tiger chi. And here it's like, okay, well, let's make a boat, and like, okay, how do we make this boat? And then we're gonna sail, or we will row for a while, so you're like working out on the fly, maybe different ways in which we can get a boat together and who's involved and how we actually get it to move. And that level of creativity can be really potent, depending on who's using it. Because I've seen certain creative things come up on a societal level that are, smoke and mirrors too. No, just kind of complete deception at like continuation of a complete deception of like, and it's funny, I haven't heard any more of that. Like, but like more deception based kind of ways in which we engage. So. Yeah, great potential, but again, it's always about who's using it.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind digging in more to deception as well, right? Well, because you were talking about that being kind of like a moralistic view, or no, it's another D word. Am I getting it wrong? Delusion versus deception. Yeah, digging in more into delusion.
The nature of delusion and where I was using that is to say that we both create and insist that a place of identity or framework that we're using is in fact enduring, is in fact like this is the way it's going to be, and like and this is the way it's always been, and we kind of close ourselves off, like.
But then you're saying that the idea of guru is like a consistency and enduring that and go with the slip. So what I'm hearing doesn't totally
Sure.
jive with one another.
Totally. Yeah. So what's the concise way to say this? It's a matter of the assumptions that we're starting with. Okay. When we say the consistency of the guru, it is to remind from Buddha's perspective is that you're already there and you've always been there. And there's no way you could be not there in terms of meditative practice or just self-cultivation of something like gongfu, right? So gongfu is like a collection of skills, and like yoga is a collection of poses. That's very elementary school level understanding of that sort of practice from within the practice itself, right? Both yoga and things like gongfu are a self-cultivation transformative practice. Like whether or not I can kick high or do like some crazy posture is really not the point, as what are those postures activating within my own meditative practice.
Mhm.
And so the assumption of the guru behind all of that is to say that, like, remember, you're already there. And you've always been there. And so there's no place to go. Okay, horse dance for 20 minutes. Right. So the delusion aspect is really just a meditation on the nature of our experience as being continuously transformative. And it can never sit still. So if I'm going to make a claim and plant my flag, it's the delusion. Yeah. But it's not a problem if I'm in it's not about like never planting a flag, that then also becomes a delusion. Like you're going to participate, the contemplative aspect of your experience is just to stay aware of the fact that it's transitory. That's all. Yeah. And even though I say that's all, this is really hard, to stay in that awareness and in that practice. But as Ming would say, like, delusion is pretty much all we do until we recognize it. And then we have the opportunity for that same thing, or new delusion, or to recognize even in what we're doing that, like, I still do it, delusion or not, that's not the point. I'm just doing it. But if I'm doing it with the sense that, like, once I get to the end, I'm going to be the most perfected human being I've ever been. And like, I will be able to be that person who sits in that chair, like, right? That's a delusion. Or whatever. We can create. It's imagination. We do it. So the idea is that we should take it in hand, like how we're imagining. And that would
And
be
that's what organized imagining.
right. How are we organizing our imagination? Like, yeah. And that the way that we're organizing our imagination is not necessarily individual. It's collective. I don't have a private language. I have a social public language. Right? Same with imagination and how we organize it. I'm going to drive on the right side. I'm going to drive on the right side of the road. Like, I'm not just going to wing it. I mean, there's some places in this country where that's how you do it. You just go where the open spots are.
Yeah.
And that's how you get from point A to point B. Why not here? That's that's how we're organizing imagination.
Those cultures, right?
Yeah, me too. Oh my God. I had some cab rides where I'm like, please let me get through this. Please. I just want to make it there. Train station. Yeah, I hope that was sufficiently abstract. Yeah. Thank you for all the questions.
Looks like no questions in the chat. Naoko, were you going to ask something about dreams?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a whole dream practice, and in fact, I would actually refer you to the Butterfly book, and also there's a couple people who are my kula or my jia that specifically do dream practice and dream work, and they like do, I guess, courses or yeah, they do specifically work in the dreaming practices that Ming left behind. They're quite amazing. Like yeah. I mean, he wrote the Butterfly book, which is essentially like a companion and list of like what certain images mean. But he taught on dreaming quite extensively. That's one area that I have not explored. But there there are two individuals in particular that I know that work together, that do that work and guide people in that way.
Name drop, name drop.
The Clarissa and oh, she's, I can't remember. Yeah, she put me in him. Back me into a corner. Yeah, so I think just generally speaking, I mean, in the same way that our imagination is like, I mean, I wrote just recently that consider your imagination to be on loan. It's not your property. And it's not, it has its tendrils, back through the realm of our ancestors. Much like your tastes, your outlook on life, your temperament, the position of your eyes, whether your toes flay out or like get all bunched together, like, your tendency for disease, like all of these things are, I mean, we call it genetics, but in fact, like another word for these things would be to say the ancestors. So our imagination is like that too. That's the reason why the hungry ghost thing can be so impactful, because, we've all got this kind of mild haunting right now, like, and our maybe edgy and like, I can't manage my emotions and like all of those things, like even if you've got having beneficent ancestors in your corner doesn't preclude you from having those experiences. In fact, you actually may be backed up in such a way that you're seen as a cauldron for things to resolve. Particularly if you have like a very strong relationship with your ancestral profile, you may be set up because that's why you're here, is to do that kind of work. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I hope that was satisfactory. But yes, exactly. It could be that you're there, to be like this lightning rod for things to pass through, and that these may be the times, of the year where it's particularly acute, but and as we go into the darker moons, dreams, so the growth of yin is essentially dream time.
I was curious because I didn't know about the hungry ghosts.
Yeah, it's I've noticed it myself, like through the summer moons, not so many dreams. It's like rest, get up, move, and then as the autumn has started coming in, then there's more. I mean, they say you dream all the time, but like there are more dreams that I remember, even if they're like completely obtuse. I'm like, what the, whatever, and you just kind of keep it moving. But I'm not in the active dreaming practice, and that can be very rich. And we could have the fate and the character, to be predisposed to such things. Yeah, so pay attention, and like consider dreaming practice if it's something that's inviting. Yeah.
I've heard of it. I'm sorry. Dream yoga, I'm curious if it's the lineage of everybody going to sleep. All right, let's meet in the dream world.
Sure.
And then there's classes in the dream world. And
Right.
then they all wake up and they all talk about what happened in class. I've seen that.
Pretty amazing stuff. Yeah. I don't know that. Again, it's not a road that I've been kind of kept my attention so far in terms of the body of work that's being left behind in these sorts of areas, and dreaming practices, a whole deeper practice of Taoist dreaming practices.
There was one time early in my martial arts career, I was learning cane, walking cane. And the night before class, my teacher taught me the form in my dream. The very next day, I learned the exact same thing, and I picked it up all the quicker because I had learned it the night before in my dream.
Yeah.
And I asked my teacher, I go, seafood, teach me that in my sleep? Because I vaguely remember a dream space. And he goes, oh yeah, I use the moon as a satellite. And then he walked away. But, you know, to this day, I swear by that experience. That
Yeah.
He came to me in my dream and taught me the movement.
Yeah.
And apparently that's quite common, right?
Yeah.
I hear that with Wilhelm Baines.
Yeah.
The way he got the teaching transmitted to him.
Right.
was-
This relationship with Jung. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I have to, yes, of course. You know, this particular cosmology, I would say, is like, it's very rich. You know, the human realm is one of many. We can't really pretend to say that, you know, is all that there is. Like, there's always ridiculous, you know, like there's so much more. And, you know, dream space is one of those, and imagination. I just was working with this idea that imagination is like you know, property on loan from sort of more ancestral influences, but the ancestors themselves don't exist in just one realm. They exist in many realms. You know, like the number of realms, you know, from a Taoist perspective, is limitless, like truly limitless. That's the reason why they do what they do, and all of their rituals around like managing how all the many limitless realms interface and interact with this one. So that's their main job, is to regulate that on a cosmological level, how all these pieces overlap. And that's the reason why the calendar is so important, because at certain points in time of the year, this day it would be like, okay, everybody stand back, you know, and they're doing this one thing to kind of regulate how those influences go down so that they become normalized, right? Not that like put up a gate, you know, and keep the bad guys out. It's to say, all right, so here comes the flood. We're just gonna, you know, get it into the sluices and let it do its thing, right? So it's never really controlling, it's just like managing, you know, kind of gently steering. And I think the same could be said for, this is the reason why your teacher had that capacity. She just go, and just drop it in. This is transmission. Like there, even in the calendar, there are like the whole first week. So the the lunar mansions exist in 4 seasons. Every moon, we go through the 4 seasons. Each week represents a season. That's the reason why these 2 weeks are actually going to be very important, because we're in the first moon of autumn, and we're about to begin tomorrow the week of autumn, in the moon of autumn. So it brings its
Science.
yeah, relationship science. So it actually brings things, it should bring things into greater focus and clarity. We should take this opportunity to put things in order for this week, to set the tone for how our autumn is going to go. Think of it like harvest, you know, like some things we want to keep, pickle that, you know, and this, like, throw it to the pigs. Like, we don't need it, you know, like let's move on without that. These sorts of discernments, like, will be going on for the next 2 moons, but this particular week going through, it's like, can be really potent. And then the week following that, which will be the end of this particular moon and in going into the next, is to commit to continuity that is then given by the ancestors. So we're both clearing the slate, and then we're turning the page into something that's always been. And like that should, you know, sort of regulate what would be called like regulating excess, and the excesses of the summer. Too much. I only need this much. And as it turns out, the appetites we have for only this much have a precedent, you know, like we got people on our side that want us to be happy and not so stressed. That would be a statement. So I'm not sure how that related, but different moons, you know, he's talking about this practice of transmission.
Yeah.
That the transmission of any teaching is not just like blah 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 blah. or illustrating a set of exercises is a chi transmission. And there is these kinds of intangible ways in which we actually set ourselves up to then adopt pattern. So anything that we adopt, study with sincerity, then we change as any kind of yoga or martial art, as a practice or a way of life, or even the things that I'm studying, you know, all these different things like the dream practice, your engagement with those things actually changes your physiology, changes. This is the whole idea behind even Buddhist prostration. Buddhist prostration is not just prayer, you know, it's a yoga. You know, so and we go through a certain amount of these sorts of exercises, the chi in our incarnation changes, like, and our physiology changes. Like, this is the idea of transmission. So that you are already in that space doing that work makes you accessible in ways you didn't even know. And next thing you just get this download in a dream on a favorable day. You know, or as the moon shifts into the day that's favorable to teach, he's already got you ahead of it. Right? This is just alchemy.
That reminds me of times when Ming would talk about learning from his teacher. He'd come ready to learn. His teacher would be like, go take a nap.
Right.
Come back in a little
You're
bit.
not ready.
Yeah.
You're not ready.
Yes, it's waiting for that.
I know this just from my own experience in writing. Like, I'll actually track it. You know, but like, yeah, it's probably not gonna work. And I gotta be okay with that. I mean, that's been a practice for me because I'm, you know, very hard charging Westerner, you know, that's like convinced of my intelligence, you know, like, and like cultivate skill and then put it together, you know. It's taken me 7 years to just have that kind of beaten out of me, you know, to where it's like, okay, say less. And also, why are you trying so hard? Like, if it doesn't work, don't do it. Wait. Yeah, most things in life, if you just wait, it's better. You'll find the space. It'll just come because you already gravitate toward what it is that you're after. We already know this, you know, like, yeah, I got up late and I was stressed out because I was, you know, but when I got there, nobody had even gotten there. Nobody was even there. Or I got there right on time. You know, the synchronicities landed in such a way, you know, or like I didn't make it at all and I did something totally unrelated and that was actually what I needed. You know, we have this all the time. You know, this is part of life. So yeah, so I think some of the wisdom tradition is too. Yeah, you should just wait for that. Don't stress. Don't try to force it. Like, just wait for, you know, wait for the stream and it'll take you. That is actually how life works, you know, after press. Yeah, good luck with that one.
Well, that's a good point to wrap
Sure,
it
yeah,
up.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Guys, thank you.
Sorry for the slow start.
Second full moon's off. Join us next month for Rooster Moon. Yeah, you can join live. You can join in the space. We got one chair left, right?
Yeah,
Or you can just watch it on YouTube.
or you could just watch it. Yeah.
Options. Bet. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice meeting you guys.
Totally.
Goodnesses, thank you.
Yeah.